When you can truly innovate and problem solve, you get a magic power that allows you to turn this into this. That is exactly what happened at Airbnb. Now a household name, you might be surprised to hear that the founders were flat broke when they started. Imagine a time when you've had no money, where you can't pay the rent, you can't pay the bills, you're worrying about the fact that your bank balance is zero. What you and I would probably do is go and get an extra job, borrow some money, look at things we could sell, but not these guys. They decided to innovate and create. They literally looked around in their flat and saw that they had some spare empty floor, spare space in their flat, and used that as a catalyst to build a $100 billion business. Now their story is well known, and I'm not going to give you their full story today, but looking at their story, I think there are 3 true moments of innovative brilliance that potentially makes them the most creative startup team I've ever come across. What I want to do today is talk to you about those 3 moments of brilliance and explain to you why they are really so good. The first of these 3 brilliant moments is, of course, the initial idea. Always the case with startup stories that they come up with some incredible idea that immediately catches fire and makes them huge overnight success. Well, that isn't quite how it was for Brian, Joe, and Nathan when they created Airbnb. Brian had just moved in to be a flatmate with Joe. They were absolutely broke, had no cash, and their rent had just been put up by a ridiculous amount, and they could not afford it. They didn't have jobs, they didn't have money, they were broke, just like so many of us have been at one time or another. What they did next is the bit that I find really interesting. Instead of going and following a traditional route to kind of finding some extra money so that they can pay the bills, they literally looked around the room that they were in, they looked around their flat, and they were like, there's some space here. We've got some airbeds in the cupboard. We can create an opportunity for people to come and stay here. Now, it just so happened that there was a big conference in town and something had been in the media, in the news about the fact that people were struggling to get hotel rooms. So they capitalized on that opportunity and they said, we're literally going to inflate some airbeds and we can give them some breakfast as well. They put up a very simple webpage on WordPress and they called it Air, Bed and Breakfast. Now, I think obviously it went on to be a huge success and we know what Airbnb is today, but the thing that I find truly brilliant about this is that as a solution to needing extra cash is something we can all learn from. It's that idea of utilizing what is around you, no matter how obscure and sort of unusual it might be. They literally were like, there's some space on the floor, let's put a bed there. I mean, that is as creative as it gets anywhere. I think, you know, the story went on and we'll cover on some other bits, but the ingenuity of that as a way of making some extra money. And the story is that they got 3 tenants, they got 3 people to come and sleep on those airbeds and pay them. They had a great time with them. They spent the weekend with them and took them around the city. And that's kind of really the start of the story. But it didn't start because they wanted to build this massive multi-billion, $100 billion company. It started because they needed some money to pay rent. And so anyone who's in a situation where you need a bit of extra money for something, you need some extra money for some bills, things are tight. Listen to this story. Listen to how they basically made money out of thin air. They just created a way of making cash out of absolutely nothing. It really is bloody brilliant. So the second moment of brilliance, a few months later, Brian and Joe by this point had also brought in a friend of theirs, Nathan, and they decided that there was merit in this idea and they wanted to have a go at trying to build a company out of it. This concept that people might have some space that they want to put an airbed on or a spare room or they might be away and there's an opportunity for them to monetize their empty property. So they've got this idea and they've decided that they want to try and run with it, and they've signed up a few hosts in a few different places and they're kind of trying to get some traction, but it's all a little bit stop-start. People think it's a bit weird. The idea of bringing strangers into your house is a bit strange. And so it was, of course, at the time. Now it feels really normal, but back then it was quite strange. These guys had their fingers on the pulse. I think that's something that is really relevant to their startup story. And in August 2008, they were aware that in Denver, Colorado, the Democratic Party conference was happening, and it was expected and foreshadowed that Barack Obama would be officially announced as the nominee for the Democratic Party. Now, what's interesting about this is that Pepsi Center, where this conference was to be held, holds something like 80,000 people. But Denver only has 15,000, 20,000 hotel rooms. So it started to become apparent in the press that people were struggling to find somewhere to stay. The guys at Airbnb, Brian, Joe, and Nathan, saw this and they thought, well, we've got a handful of rooms, I think it was about 25 rooms of hosts in Denver that can host that are available. And so they started reaching out to media contacts and saying, hey, we're this startup, we've got some space. If you tell people about it, then we should be able to help accommodate people who are struggling to find somewhere to stay. And this got picked up. And it ended up on CNN, and the media wanted comment from them. They covered the fact that there was this startup that had this space that was particularly available for the event. And so those spaces got filled up and they got that coverage. Now, there are two things that were really interesting about this. I think the first thing is that they were capitalizing on an opportunity. They were fingers on the pulse and they saw that there was an opportunity. But the other thing that really became relevant was that they built a black book of media contacts right away. Because they got coverage, they kept these people's details, and that would prove very, very useful later. The third moment of brilliance in the startup story of Airbnb is around funding. Anyone who's ever run a startup, an early stage business, knows that funding is a very important part of that journey. And it's the thing that a lot of people spend a lot of time on and are extremely worried about. And basically it's a constant battle to try and keep the lights on and give yourself enough runway to let the business take off and kind of establish yourself in the space that you're trying to be in. These guys were no exception. They knocked on the door of every investment company and VC that you could find, everyone who was investing in all of the other startups around the same time, and they got the door closed in their face. There's one particular story where an investor actually left halfway through the meeting. They didn't even realize that he left, and they sat there waiting for him to come back from the bathroom or the car or whatever, and he just did not come back. That's how uninvestable they were considered to be. Now, lots of startups at this point, when they can't raise money, they kind of just go bust. These guys didn't just give up. Instead, they decided to get creative once again. They thought as far out of the box as it possibly could be. So far out of the box that it actually ended up back in a cereal box. So Air, Bed, and Breakfast. Airbeds, we've got some traction on. We're doing something on Airbed's Breakfast. These guys decided in the peak of American presidential election cycle to create some novelty cereal to cover the election cycle between Barack Obama and John McCain. They created these novelty cereals that were amazing. They were lovely boxes. They were really well designed, and they literally went to the supermarket and bought a load of cereal, took it out of those boxes and put it into these boxes. Now, what they did next was they sent boxes of cereal to the media people that they had met a couple of months before during the Denver, Colorado situation where they got a load of media attention. And now they're saying, we're still running this startup, but we've created these novelty cereals, these limited edition cereals to mark the occasion of the election, because we're Airbeds and Breakfast. And once again, they get picked up a couple of months after they're known in the media and they get some media coverage for having some accommodation at the convention. They're now back in the media because they've produced these novelty limited edition boxes of cereal. And sure enough, people bought them. People, collectors, enthusiasts, people who follow political history bought the cereals. They were selling these boxes of cereals for $50 a time, and they raised something close to $30,000 from their cereal campaign. Now, this is these guys, once again, just like they were at the start, flat broke, going, we need some cash. In the first instance, it was, there's some space on the ground, let's put an airbed there and rent it out. And this time it's, let's make some cereal. Let's literally make some novelty cereal and sell it using the contacts that we got from before. This is just so creative as a way of problem solving. This is so far out of the box. Now, of course, the story is that it just happened, and I'm sure that isn't how it unfolded, but that's where they got to. They got to a point where they said, we can go out there and we can make money doing this. We can bring some cash in. That's incredible. Again, when you need money, when you need funding, when you're broke, be creative. These guys made this money because they were creative. That's what they did. That's their superpower. That's how they were able to turn thin air into cash, and a hell of a lot of cash at that. A little while after that, they were still trying to raise money, still trying to grow. And of course, the real story, if you want the The full story of these guys, like I say, has been documented many times. There are lots and lots of other parts of their story. Troubles with trying to get the right pictures, trying to make sure that hosts understood people who were coming to stay. That whole kind of cycle. They went and spent a whole bunch of time in New York actually dealing with their hosts and spending time together with them so that they could optimize their product. It changed and evolved every single day, as startups do. But when they were looking for investment, they went to Y Combinator, run by Paul Graham. And Paul Graham wasn't going to give them any money or fund them or let them into the program until they told the story of the cereal and gave him a box of cereal. And the reason that he did let them into the program, the reason that Airbnb got the leg up that it needed to go on and kind of create what it's created, was that Paul Graham said, you guys are like a cockroach. You will not die. You know how to overcome obstacles. You will just keep going. Nothing can kill you. You will just keep finding solutions. That is why they got the investment that they got. It had nothing really to do with the idea. 100 other people could have come up with this idea. Loads of other people. There are lots of holiday letting websites, lots of other things. The reason these guys were successful, the reason that they turned no money and thin air into a $100 billion company, is that they just kept going and they were super creative in their thinking. They weren't constrained. They didn't think, oh, well, we're a lettings company. We rent out beds, so we couldn't possibly go make cereal. They weren't constrained by convention at the start when they didn't have any money, and they didn't think, let's sell something we own, let's ask for a loan. They thought, no, we have got some space here and we can do something with this. And their timing and their ability to have their finger on the pulse and do things at the opportune moment in order to be able to get maximum coverage was exceptional. These guys, Brian, Joe, Nathan, they have built a fantastic company, a company which, by the way, was severely hit, as were so many others, by COVID. And yet they have got a fantastic organization that brings people together the world over and creates opportunity for people to earn extra income from their spare rooms and the space on their floor. Airbnb, these guys made billions of dollars from thin air. You can too if you're super, super creative and you just keep going like a cockroach. Thanks for watching. See you next time.